Hi, my name is Frederik Bussler. As she introduced, I'm the founder of AngelStarter and the Security Token Alliance. So I'm going to be talking about the journey from crypto to security tokens. And if we're going to be talking about that, we need to start at the beginning with Bitcoin. So I don't want to beat a dead horse because you've probably heard 100 people mention this. But it's important to realize how Bitcoin started and the ethos behind it. So the point of Bitcoin was that you didn't want to have these intermediaries getting their dirty hands in the middle of everything and deciding to who you can send money to. So the whole point was that you can send crypto to anyone, anywhere. And that's a really cool thing. It doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, your nationality. It doesn't matter if you're on any lists. I can send crypto to you. But that's a problem if you start to look at things like securities. Because in the US, for example, a security can't be sent to a minor. You can't send a security to someone under 18. You can't send a security to a terrorist, obviously, or anyone on a watch list of some sort. But you can't program these things into crypto. A Bitcoin doesn't care who you are. A Bitcoin, there's no parameters to who you can send it to. It's a double-edged sword, basically. So as I said, no restrictions means that there's no compliance. And it's the same as with any other industry. If you're not compliant, then the regulators will come to get you, basically. So you can actually look at press releases on the SEC's website, which I think is really funny, because it's just like a list of all the people they're suing. And a lot of these now are ICOs and token offerings, and they're going against a lot of the unregulated tokens out there. Even companies that aren't based in the US. One notable example is Kik, which is a Canadian company. They had a $100 million ICO a couple years back, and now they're getting a $100 million lawsuit by the SEC, even though they tried to avoid having US investors. So the SEC could, in theory, come after you here in Greece. The SEC goes after people around the world. So this is kind of what I imagine the people raising money in 2017 look like right now. So a few months back, Trump kind of had this famous tweet where he said that crypto is unregulated and backed by nothing, and it kind of caused the price of Bitcoin to crash a bit. But that is actually completely true. You might argue that crypto is backed by like trust or it's backed by cryptography, but those aren't tangibles. An investor wouldn't consider Bitcoin to be a backed asset. There's no equity, debt, or some other sort of asset. So if you're an investor, that's a problem, and if you're a regulator, that's a problem as well. So the alternative I'll get into now are security tokens. And security tokens are kind of what they sound like. They're basically tokens backed by securities. So they're only related to crypto in the sense that they're using blockchain, but in every other sense, they're more like a traditional financial instrument. So it's kind of obvious that this is better suited to a traditional investor because an investor looks at the tangibles of a company. They want to look at things like the revenue and the P&L statement, and they want to look at what the company is producing. And if you have something like a Bitcoin or an Ether or an ERC20 token, none of those are reflective of the tangibles in a company. But a security token, as I said, it's backed by a security, so it's reflective of the underlying value of a company. And regulators, of course, they're trying to protect retail investors from fraud. That's the mission of the SEC. So you can't really, it's hard to protect someone who's investing in an ICO because you don't really know what they're investing in. If it's an ERC20 token, which is backed by nothing, how do you protect them from what's going to happen? There's no good case for how to protect them. So basically, it's better for regulators and investors, logically. And a lot of people, we've heard other people talking about security tokens, and they talk about the market of things like real estate, and people talk about potential use cases like whiskey or something that increases in value over time, or diamonds or something like that. But I think security tokens actually have a much broader scope, a much broader use case, because they're meant to be a replacement to securities, one that's more operationally efficient. Because in the private market, a lot of times things are completely inefficient, where you have things that are paper-based and very slow. So I think the market of security tokens is actually the market of securities. And of course, that's a multi-$100 trillion market, because it's almost anything you can think of. It's businesses, it's startups, it's equity, real estate, debt, derivatives. It's almost everything. So from what I've said, you might think that I'm against crypto and for security tokens, and that's not really the case. Of course, it's more nuanced than that, and it's not black and white, that one is good and one is bad. So with a security token, I keep saying it's basically backed by security, so it's reflective of the underlying value of a company. And if you want to actually do that on a technical level, it's pretty complicated. Like an ERC20 token, you can literally pull out your phone and just fill out a form and make an ERC20 token. But a security token, you want to have things like a transfer restriction. So you want to be able to code on a smart contract on the blockchain that, for example, someone under 18 can't have access to the token, or someone outside the jurisdiction you're licensed in can't have the token. And there's a million other functions that you might want to put in depending on the complexity of the instrument. So if you want to put all this in, it's going to be a lot more complex than the things we're used to. So a lot of people, if you actually look up security token projects, they say they have an ERC20 security token. And it's actually really confusing. Because if you want to look at ERC20 on a technical level, ERC20 is defined by a few parameters. And that's things like the name of the token, the symbol of the token, and how many decimals. So you can look at like Ether, the shorthand is ETH, and there's 18 decimals. So an ERC20 token it's very simple, it's very basic. You can't put in the million of these parameters we were looking at. So you can't have an ERC20 security token, but most of the supposed security token projects are using ERC20. So if you're interested in the space, you have to look deeper and look at other parameters. For example, the project I'm working on now is using ERC 1404. There are other blockchains as well to use. So just to get into AngelStarter, which is the security token project I'm working on, it's basically an equity crowdfunding platform using security tokens. So I firmly believe that there's no point in using any technology for the sake of the technology, and that decentralization and trustlessness on their own don't really mean anything. So the reason we're actually using security tokens is because right now there is no machinery, there's no method on the market for entrepreneurs in developing countries to raise money from investors in developed countries with low fees. Like there's no mechanism out there for it, and there's no mechanism that has no flat fee, because you don't have something that doesn't require consulting fees from lawyers right now. So if you want to put it into perspective, in the US, it's actually very easy to raise money, especially if you're in a field like blockchain. And if you're in a developing country, let's say somewhere in Africa, it's borderline impossible. I know a handful of projects where that's changing in Africa, but for like the vast majority of cases, it's almost impossible to raise money in Africa. And the reason for that is there's not any good mechanism for foreign investment. There's no mechanism where there's no flat fee for the projects in Africa as well. So imagine you're an entrepreneur in Nigeria and you want to raise money, and the platform has just a $1,000 flat fee. That probably sounds like nothing to you and I, but if you're in Nigeria, the average person makes a lot less than that per month. So just to kind of put a metaphor to it, the model behind AngelStarter is pretty simple. It's kind of like baking a cake. So if you make a cake, you get the ingredients, put it together, you bake it, and now you have like pieces of a cake you can sell. With AngelStarter, it's the idea that you have the business documents about your business, and then you can basically upload this on the blockchain in something like an ERC 1404 contract, and now you have tokens that are shares of your company, and you can sell those shares. So security tokens are a fairly new construct. The protocol we're using, ERC 1404, actually came out only about 1 year ago. And we've kind of modified that protocol. So what we're doing is like bleeding edge. It's very new. But the security token space has, in general, been around for maybe about 2 years. And this is a map of all the partners of the Security Token Alliance. So these are all people who signed an agreement with us that basically together we want to help bring security tokens to mass adoption. And this is over 100 member organizations. So there is a lot of activity in the security token space already. It may not look like it as much as the activity in crypto and the activity we saw in ICOs and IEOs. But that's because, again, this is more reflective of the traditional space. It's more like IPOs than ICOs. Yes, I'm available for questions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frederik. Anyone has questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I've been following the crypto space for about 3-4 years, and it started with well, you know, the main crypto assets, and then we had the ICOs, and then we had I remember they promised like a new wave. It will be like security token offerings, STOs. We haven't seen much of that really to start with. And then we also learned that there were companies, important ones, for example, in the US, Overstock and T0. And I read the news, and I learned that T0 had been granted a license to operate as a platform for security tokens or tokenized assets, you name it. Also, I remember Polymath was one of the leaders at that point. They also offered like a new protocol as opposed to ERC20. I think they call it STC20 or something like that. I wanted to know what is the current state of all this mess, so to speak. So, I'm sorry for the word. So, do we really have the possibility of investing safely in security tokens, tokenized assets, fractional ownership, you name it? Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this mess comes down to the fact that there's no regulatory or legal clarity, especially in places like the US. So the US it's a really terrible place if you're interested in security tokens. So if you want to be licensed for like a security token offering in the US, you have to look at different regulations. And if you're a crowdfunding platform, you want to have licenses for all of those. So you want something like Reg CF, Reg crowdfunding, Reg A+, a number of different regulations that are actually very hard to get. And then you need to do that on a state-by-state basis. So you can't, you know, like in the EU, you can passport these licenses around other member nations of the EU. So it's a lot easier in the EU. But yeah, in the US, it's just extremely difficult to get that licensing. Besides the regulatory difficulties, which I don't think should be understated, because if you're only licensed like in the US, for example, then none of you can invest in any security token. But the other thing I think is a lot of projects, they focus too much on the fact that they're using blockchain and security tokens, but obviously nobody really cares. Like the layperson doesn't care about blockchain, so you have to focus on the actual benefits to them. And I think these projects have to focus more on, what do they actually offer in terms of like efficiency and cost benefit.
We have time for one more question. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, thanks for your presentation and the good things. I'm from the startup space, so there's a lot of things that resonate with me. I just wanted to ask, what's the differentiating factor, apart from, let's say, some sort of automation, between crowdfunding, equity funding, and security tokens in this respect.
Sure.
What you
Yeah, I think the one thing is just efficiency. Like if I put it into one word, there are a number of equity crowdfunding platforms out there. One is Seed Invest. One I think is just called Crowdfunder. And these all have flat fees. I think Seed Invest is the worst example. But some of these have flat fees up to $10,000, which is, it means it's completely inaccessible to any entrepreneur in a developing country. So a security token, as I said, you can have something like an ERC standard, and that has just gas costs, like less than a penny to send and receive it. Versus if you have normal equity crowdfunding, let's say you want a meeting with the lawyer and then you draft an agreement so that a certain person has shares. It's a lot more expensive than security tokens.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Frederik.
Thank you.
Thank you.